The news cycle moves so fast under President Donald Trump, but just last week, the big issues of the day were ICE deportations and Donald Trump sent the National Guard into Chicago. And that's what I want to focus on today with over on the All In podcast, Jason Calacanis being completely owned by David Sachs on this exact same issue. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
People oppose what Trump is doing right now, and he is at an all-time low. So you have to ask yourself why. It's the violence and the cruelty of it that I object to. And it's the inefficiency in terms of the cost of it. I don't believe that mothers should be separated from their children, or the fathers should be separated from their children. I don't believe it should be done in a brutal way, and doesn't need to be. It could very easily be done with other tactics. And that is what I take great offense to, is both of those things, the inefficiency of it. And then also, I take offense to the derailing of the Trump 2.0 agenda, which I was in favor of. And I will call balls and strikes when Trump tips back into those authoritarian tendencies, the Trump 1.0 agenda that I've talked about. I'm not in favor of that. I don't like it. I would much prefer to see us be compassionate to immigrants. I would much rather see us take a softer hand and a path to these folks who've been here for 20 or 30 years. I'd like to see a path to them to become citizens, because I think this country was built by immigrants for immigrants. And I believe we should continue that. But it should be legal immigration. And if people were here illegally because Republicans and Democrats who were super in favor of NAFTA wanted them here, we should take ownership of that and be kind and compassionate to them and give them a path if they're not criminals and if they pay their taxes, which almost universally they do. We should give them a path to citizenship.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to do is point out that you mentioned that DOGE was one of the most wonderful and popular things that President Trump did. And I agree that it was a great thing that he did. It basically trying to streamline the government and make it more efficient, but it was not popular. It had only a 35% approval rating, while 57% disapproved. Why is that? Because the media pounded on DOGE and Elon and turned him into a villain and tried to mischaracterize what he was trying to do and blamed him for every possible thing that was supposedly going wrong in the federal government. So look, obviously the polling is not always a great indicator, even when it is accurate. And I remember when Ann Seltzer told us that Trump was going to lose Iowa by 10. So obviously these pollsters often have no idea what they're talking about. In terms of the merits of this, you're completely ignoring the fact that there are lawless mobs who are the ones creating the violence, not our law enforcement officers, not ICE, not DHS. In the city of downtown Portland, for example, you have literal Antifa terrorists who are extremely organized, they're aggressive, and they're well-funded. This is not just some sort of ragtag bunch. The White House uncovered a bunch of left-wing NGOs who are funding Antifa, along with other leftist protest groups. These NGOs have laundered over $100 million of our money to fund terrorist violence in our streets. Antifa even has a safe house near the epicenter of the unrest in downtown Portland that local cops and local media know about, but nothing's being done. And it's this group that has basically terrorized downtown Portland and led to violent assaults, not our law enforcement officers. But when this violence breaks out because of Antifa, then the media blames the Trump administration for it. So I'm not surprised that the polling reflects that, because that's what the media does. But look, the bottom line here is, what is the policy that the Trump administration should pursue? And previous administrations have pursued deportations, and so has the Trump administration. I don't think you can have 10 to 15 million illegal immigrants allowed during the Biden years and then just say there's going to be an amnesty. I mean, what are we supposed to do? This situation was not created by Trump. It was created by Biden. They opened up the border. There were holes in the border walls. Millions of people streamed through. They were bussed all over the country. Trump won on fixing that problem, and deportations were part of the mandate. Now he's doing it. Can't just be a one-way ratchet. When the Republicans are in power, they close the border, and then when the Democrats are in power, they open it up, allow 10, 15 million illegals in, and then we can do nothing about it when we take power. No, that's not the way this works. There has to be a correction to what Biden did, which was outrageous. And I remember plenty of liberals, while that was going on, they were saying that the videos we saw on Fox News were cherry-picked. They said that there was no real situation at the border. We were gaslit constantly about it. Whereas every single person who actually visited the border said the same thing, that it was outrageous, that Biden had opened up the border, that people were streaming through, they were running through. And Trump won on a mandate of fixing this problem. And now that he is fixing it, what we have people do is claim that he's the source of the violence. No, Antifa and left-wing rioters are the source of the violence. You don't see this violence in red cities, and you don't even see it in the blue cities which have offered to cooperate with Trump, like Memphis or like DC. So when you see cooperation from these cities, they are actually cleaning them up. But in Chicago and in Portland, you have violent protesters, and that is the source of the problem. And the media can blame it all on Trump as much as they want, but fundamentally that is what's going on.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic. Anybody else?
I'm surprised as someone who normally supports law enforcement that you're not backing these guys up.
Oh, I support law enforcement. I do not think they should do it the way they're doing it. It's the violence, it's the cruelty that I object to.
Okay.
I don't mind people being held accountable for crossing the border. I don't mind the deportations. I do think
How do you think it should be done, Jacob?
Yeah, so a very simple method would be if you went to people who are employing, and because the people who are here illegal are here to build a better life for their families and to live the American dream. That's why they're here. They're here to get a job and to have a better life for their children. If they are working illegally, and so they're here, they're the most industrious people I've ever met in my life, immigrants, including the two of you. Most industrious people are the immigrants. We know that. And so a very simple way to do this, if you wanted to do it without cruelty and without burning $100,000 per person, is to go to where they're being employed. You go to that car wash. You say, I'd like to see everybody's paper. Everybody runs. They show you the papers. Whichever person is not actually employed there legally and who doesn't have their papers, you give a $10,000 fine. And then you come back the next day and you give a $20,000 fine. And if you did that, this would be incredibly effective and you wouldn't have the brutality you have. Under no circumstances, and I've talked to many of my relatives who are cops and many of my friends, they look at what ICE is doing and they see it as being unnecessarily brutal. All you have to do is go to where they're working and give the fines and then round people up who are, in fact, criminals. No problem with any gang members or any felons to be taken down. And sometimes you have to do that with force, obviously, if they're criminals. But for everybody else, we can do this compassionately and we can do it much more efficiently. We could do it by just paying people to self-deport, and we could increase that rate. And actually, that actually has been working. The story hasn't been told yet. I think we'll see that in the statistics, that of the 300,000 or 400,000 people we wind up deporting, probably a third of them are going to be people who self-deported. And we'll share those statistics here as we go. But it's strictly the violence.
I'll just note that in D.C., D.C. is the city where Trump was first able to basically get involved in trying to stop the crime, because he was able to bring in the National Guard, and everyone understands that the feds run DC, so he has a free hand. Have we seen any of the problems that we're talking about in DC? No, we haven't. It's calm. People can go out at night. They're going to restaurants again. The citizens are happy. Why? Because the things you're talking about are the result of violent Antifa protests in Chicago and Portland. Because the local politicians like J.B. Pritzker have an incentive to blame everything on Trump, and they've been turning a blind eye to these local gangs who are creating all the problems.
Yeah, we're in a strong agreement that Antifa, and I'll add to it the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, who brought tons of guns to the Capitol and who ran January 6th. I agree with you. All of those radical organizations should be handled. We're in strong agreement. And just
the fact that you're bringing up the non sequitur of January 6th tells me that you've lost this debate.
Ooh, that was a brutal finishing move by David Sachs, okay? Because when you bring up January 6th, you've already lost the argument, because guess what? We've had an election since then, and Donald Trump won, okay? So no one cares about January 6th anymore. But there's a couple of things I want to point out, right? You have Jason Calacanis saying two things that are in opposition to each other, in my mind. He says, I think that illegal immigrants should be held accountable, but he also thinks a path for citizenship should be provided. How is that accountability? I guess he thinks that, yeah, a small fine, a slap on the wrist, don't do that again, and then bam, you're a citizen. I guess that is the accountability he's talking about, okay? But it doesn't make any sense, because when you promise amnesty to people who come in and just don't do anything bad again, that is not a disincentive to stop illegal immigration, because as all left-leaning people, even though David Calacanis swears he's a moderate, Democrats and left-leaning individuals actually don't believe in borders. They think there should be no difference between our country and any any other country in the world, because obviously we don't have a different culture. We don't have a different economy, right? We don't believe different things. We're all the same. When, as a matter of fact, we are definitely not. And our wide open border has proven this time and time again. But that didn't seem to me to be the only time that Jason Calacanis contradicted himself, right? He says we should be paying people to self-deport, but at the same time, it costs too much for ICE to go ahead and deport these people. All right. Now, is there a difference of cost? Does ICE actually have a ramped up budget? Yes, they do, because they have to actually go into the cities that are not cooperating and round up those dangerous criminal illegal aliens that supposedly Jason Calacanis says he's okay with deporting. But of course, the problem is places like Chicago and Los Angeles and Portland are not cooperating. So what does ICE have to do? They have to mobilize, and they have to mobilize in large numbers and call on the National Guard, simply because you have these violent Antifa protesters coming out and literally fighting them. That's why it costs so much, because you have to have basically an army come in just to enforce federal law in a state that does not want to cooperate. And this is where David Sachs comes in and says, you know what? If you look at the red states, you don't have this same issue. You don't have to send in the National Guard just to simply have the federal government enforce the federal laws, because you don't have the crazy mayors and governors out there actually inciting violent protests by the left-wing mob, okay? And even in Democrat states where they're choosing to cooperate, you're still getting better results. You're not seeing the same level of destruction. You're not seeing the same level of violence. And why? Because they're choosing to cooperate with Donald Trump and his complete constitutional ability to enforce these federal laws. And even though Jason Calacanis is going to point to a YouGov CBS poll as saying, oh, look how unpopular all this stuff is with the American people, you have David Sachs coming out and say, you know, a lot of polls have been wrong about Donald Trump and what he's doing. I mean, after all, they thought that he was going to lose both elections. And of course, he points out that ridiculous Iowa poll that had Kamala Harris winning by 12 points. All right. So yes, polling can be wrong. And as a matter of fact, it often is. And when it comes to this public sentiment that Donald Trump was elected on, by the way, it automatically brings all of those polls under suspicion. And of course, the last point we want to discuss is the media cover-up. All right. Remember what they did to Doge. Okay, Donald Trump was elected on cutting government waste. And when he actually did it, the media turned on the full spigots of propaganda and said, see how bad Elon Musk is? See how bad Donald Trump is for trying to actually do this, even though people actually voted for it? Okay, you're seeing the same thing now. As was mentioned, people actually went to the border and saw with their own eyes what was happening. They came back disgusted. But the problem is, many on the left, they're seeing just CNN and ABC and NBC, etc., and they're not seeing the videos that we all saw of the wide open border, of the hundreds of thousands of people that were pouring across it every single day, right? They were totally not privy to that information simply because the mainstream media was choosing not to give it to them. But as soon as people found out about it, they're like, yeah, that's pretty bad. And that's why the Republicans' move of actually shipping the illegal immigrants all over the country was so successful, because a lot of people simply didn't know the amounts, the numbers, the problems that were actually happening from our southern border. And as soon as their eyes were open to it, all of a sudden it's like, that's not a good look. And what do you know? Donald Trump wins the election. And the same thing is going to be happening here. Case in point, Washington, D.C., as David Sachs says, hey, there's actually a nightlife now that doesn't involve drive-by shootings, okay? You can actually go out and have a nice dinner with your family and walk around, because now the streets are safe because laws are being enforced, which of course apparently is the last thing the Democrats want to do. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me.